Chapter 3, Time Traveling. Last Thursday, I told some of you how the time machine worked. I even showed you the machine in my workshop. It's there now, but it is worn from travel. One of the control bars is cracked. The other bar is bent, but it still works. I thought I'd have all the work on it finished last Friday, the day after we had dinner. But at the last minute, I found that one of the bars was too short. I didn't get the machine working until this morning. The time machine began its career at 10 o'clock today. I made some last-minute checks, then I took my place on the seat. I took the control bars in my hands. I gave a small push on the forward bar. Right away, I became dizzy. I felt as if I were falling. I pressed the other bar to stop the machine. The feeling went away. I looked around me at my workshop. It looked the same. Had anything happened? Then I looked at the clock. When I had began, it had been 10 o'clock. Now it was after 4 o'clock. Then I took a deep breath. I grabbed the bar and off I went. The workshop faded and then it grew dark. My housekeeper came into the workshop. She walked across the room and didn't even see me. She moved so fast that she seemed to fly. I pushed the forward bar all the way. Night came so suddenly that it was like turning out a lamp. A new day came right after it. The changes came faster. Now I couldn't see my workshop at all. A buzzing sound filled my ears. I guess that at some time in the future, my workshop was destroyed. I suddenly found myself in the open air. I was going so fast that I couldn't follow moving things with my eyes. Even the slowest snail moved faster than a bullet. I went still faster. It's hard to tell you how it feels to travel in time. It isn't pleasant at all. You have the feeling that you're going too fast. You think that if you hit something, you'll die from the crash. I saw the sun hopping across the sky. Each minute became a day, and I went still faster. I saw trees growing so fast that they rose like puffs of smoke from the ground. I saw big buildings rise and fall in minutes. I kept going faster. After a while, I noticed that my speed was over a year a minute. I didn't want to stop. What wonderful things would I see? How far ahead of 1895 would the world be? Would there be no war, no sickness? I had high hopes. I pressed the bar to stop the machine, but I had made the mistake of pushing it too hard. The machine was moving so fast that it stopped with a thud. I heard a sound like thunder. I was thrown headfirst into the air. When I landed, I think I passed out for a few seconds. When I came to, a heavy hail was falling. I was sitting on the ground. The machine was on its side next to me. The buzzing in my ears was gone. I looked around me. There were flowering bushes all around. The big purple and pink flowers were bending under the beating of the hail. In a moment, I was wet to the skin. I remember thinking, this isn't a very nice welcome for someone who has traveled so many years to see you. After a while, I thought, what a fool I am to be getting wet like this. There must be some place I can go to get out of the rain and hail. I looked around and saw a big white figure close to me. I looked up at it. It was very big. It looked like a lion with wings, like a sphinx in Egypt. But instead of wings being folded back, they were spread out. I think the figure was made of marble. Its base was metal, which was green with age. The face of the sphinx was turned toward me. Its empty eyes seemed to watch me. There was a hint of a smile on its lips. It was very old and badly worn from the weather. I had a feeling that the Sphinx was rotten inside. not from age, but from a sickness. I don't know how long I stood there looking up at it. The hail and rain began to let up. The sky was getting lighter. I began to think about this new age I was in. What would the people be like? Would they be like the people I knew? Or would they be so different that I would seem very strange to them? They might even kill me, thinking I was some dangerous animal. As the skies clear, I saw large buildings nearby. They were white and shiny from the rain. The sun made them look even brighter. I felt afraid of what might come out of those buildings. I went to the time machine. After much hard work, I got it to stand up again. Once I was seated on the machine, I felt better. Now I could get away in a hurry if I had to. I looked back at the big white buildings. High up on the wall of the nearest building, I saw a round opening. A group of people came out. They were wearing colorful robes. I could tell they had seen me. Then I heard voices coming toward me. Suddenly, I saw tiny people running through the bushes. One of the men came out of the bushes. He was a small, thin creature, perhaps 4 feet high. He wore a short purple robe with a belt at the waist. He had sandals on his feet. He didn't need to wear much more. For the first time, I noticed how warm the air was. He was beautiful and graceful, but he also looked weak, as if he could be broken easily. I relaxed, feeling that I was in no danger. I stood up and got off of the time machine. Chapter 4, A New Kind of People. In a minute, we were standing face to face. He came up to me and laughed. If he was afraid of me, he didn't show it. He turned to the others who were with him. He spoke to them in a strange language. I couldn't understand a word of it. Others came up. Soon 8 or 10 of these little people were all around me. One of them tried to speak to me. I shook my head. Then I pointed to my ears and shook my head again. I was trying to tell them I didn't understand their language. One of them stepped forward. She touched my hand. Suddenly, I felt all their tiny hands upon my arms and back. I was uneasy for a second. Then it came to me what they were doing. They wanted to make sure I was real. I told myself, why should I be afraid? I could pick the whole bunch up and throw them around if I wanted to. But then I saw them also trying to touch the time machine. Quickly, I went to the machine. I took off the control bars and put them in my pockets. I couldn't let these creatures fool with the machine. It was my only way of getting back home. Then I turned back to the little people. I would try to get through to them somehow. I also took a closer look at them. Their faces were as fine as those of little dolls. They all had curly blonde hair on their heads, but their faces and bodies were hairless. They had large, round eyes. In a way, they looked like deer, with their thin lips and pointed chins. What surprised me was the way they acted toward me. Here I was, a strange creature among them, but they didn't seem to want to know anything about me. No one tried to speak with me. They just stood around smiling. Now and then they spoke to each other. Their voices sounded more like birds cooing than people talking. I tried again to get through to them. First, I pointed to the time machine. Then I pointed to myself. I stopped for a second. How could I explain the idea of time travel? I pointed to the sun. To my surprise, one of the little people did the same thing. Then he made a sound like thunder. I was surprised. The dial on the time machine said that I was in the year 802,701. I had always thought that the people of the future would be far ahead of the people of 1895. Were the people of the future fools? This little person was asking me a question that a child of 1895 wouldn't ask. He wanted to know if I had come from the sun in a thunderstorm. I looked into his big eyes. I knew that I could never explain it to him. Instead, I nodded my head. Again, I pointed to the sun. I made the sound of thunder. They all took a few steps back and bowed to me. They probably thought I was some kind of god. They began to pick flowers and make them into chains. They put these chains around my neck. In a few minutes, I was almost covered with flowers. One of them took me by the hand. With the others following, we walked toward one of the big buildings I'd seen. As we walked by the big marble sphinx, it seemed to smile at me. I smiled back. What a joke! This was the world of the future, and its people were no smarter than 5-year-olds? I didn't worry about the time machine being left alone. These people could never figure out how it worked. The building was bigger than I had thought. There were hundreds of little people around me, but the building could have held thousands more. I looked closer at this great stone hall. Nobody took care of it. Little by little, it was falling apart. The floors were made of shiny white metal, but as hard as the metal was, it showed signs of wear. It was as if thousands of little feet had worn it down. But how many thousands of years did it take? Small marble tables stood all around the hall. On these tables were piles of fruit. But what fruit? A strawberry was the size of a basketball, and an orange was bigger. The rest of the fruit was strange to me. The people made signs to me to sit down. Instead of chairs, we sat on pillows on the floor. They began to eat right away. They threw the peels from the fruit into the holes that were next to the tables. They ate more like animals than people. I joined in, but with better manners. As soon as I finished my meal, I tried again to talk to the little people. There had to be some way to reach them. I began by making little sounds. I made my voice go up to mean I was asking a question. They thought I was funny. They saw me as a strange creature making noises. But I didn't let their laughing get to me. I kept at it. I felt like a school teacher in the middle of a crowd of children, but little by little, I got through. In a few hours, I had learned some words. I knew how to say you, me, her, him, and even hungry and eat. But it was slow work. Like babies, they grew bored very quickly. They would wander off. I knew then that my lessons would have to be short. There was another funny thing about them. They really were not interested in anything. I was something new to them. They kept coming up to me just to get a good look. But once they did, they'd go off to find a new toy. I went out of the great hall to explore. I was surprised at how many things had changed. When I left my house in 1895, I was in the heart of London. The river was not far from my home. I went to the top of a large hill and looked around. There was no signs of the city. The only buildings were the ones close to me. The river had changed over the years. I could see that it had moved about a mile away from where it used to be. I walked back toward the Great Hall. I came across something that had been a large building, but now it was all junk. Flowers and grass grew over it. I noticed that something else was different. There were no small houses. Everyone lived together in the buildings I saw when I arrived. They all ate together and wore the same kind of clothes. And there was even more sameness. I hadn't noticed it before. I began to look closer at the little people. It was hard to tell which of them were men and which were women. I also couldn't tell if the children were boys or girls. They looked just like smaller models of their parents. I was full of wonder. So this was the world of the future. People were weak, but they didn't have to be strong. There was no heavy work to do. There were no wars to fight. Food grew all around. The people didn't have to plant the fruit. They didn't have to pick it except for when they were hungry. With no work to be done, people had grown lazy. All they did was eat and play. I was seeing Earth in the sunset of human history. It wasn't just that most of the buildings were in ruins. The minds of the people were the saddest ruins of all. Fewer people lived in that world than in our time, but there was no war and no sickness. The people must have come up with a way to control their numbers. That way there would be enough food and space for everyone. So I thought then. But as it turned out, I was wrong. I was very wrong, and in a way that is almost too awful to speak of.